Greetings, dear witches, and thank you for tuning in to the Modern Witches podcast, brought to you by the witches behind the Modern Witches Confluence and our Witches Gather event series. I am your host and Modern Witches creatrix, Casey Zabala, and I am here to offer this space to commune with the many multifaceted currents of witchcraft at work in our world. Together, may we collectively re-enchant our realities, both here and between the worlds. Most astrology software is outdated and hard to use, creating frustration in your practice. Luna empowers your sacred spaces with beautiful astrology software. Enhance your focus across all your devices with zero hassles, freeing yourself from ads and clunky designs. Transform your astrology with Luna's beautiful and intuitive interface, allowing you to wow your clients and immerse yourself more deeply in your craft. Don't let outdated and ad-ridden software restrict you to a single platform and create frustration. Empower your sacred spaces by visiting lunaastrology.com today and entering code CONFLUENCE during sign-up for a 15% off discount. Find this code in our show notes. Hello and welcome to the Modern Witches podcast. This is our digital altar space for exploring the many multifaceted currents of witchcraft that are alive in our world. And I am deeply excited to be having a special guest, Antigone Nastos, here for this conversation, who is a friend and a colleague and a collaborator. And yeah, we've been talking about having this conversation for a while, and it's happening in Leo season, which feels fun. And so thank you for being here, Antigone.
Yeah, I'm super stoked to be here. I know timing is a thing.
It
So
is.
this is the timing.
I'd love it if you could introduce yourself for our listeners.
Yeah, so as you said, my name is Antigone Nastos. It's a very dramatic name that was given to me by my parents. I am born and raised in Greece and moved to the San Francisco Bay Area in modern day California when I was in my mid-20s. And I now, post Saturn return and a lot of soul searching, I now have a practice where I help people. I don't think help is the right word, but guide people into having their own relationship with spirit and the divine.
Such a needed service. And I should mention, Antigone was on our conjuring committee for a couple years for the Modern Witches organization, and just helped us so much in terms of like event scope, planning, management. So Antigone, I feel like you wear a lot of hats.
I do. It's true. I tried to separate my hats and be like, I'm just one thing, but I think that's impossible due to my chart setup, but also because humans.
Totally.
So I still wear a few, well, more than a few hats, but I am a combination of like production witch and practical witch. And also, I think it really informs my practice to have that sort of organizational and, dare I say, tech aspect to my life and be able to combine it with a spiritual and magical practice a lot. And I think we did that. I was part of the Conjuring Council when in 2020. So remember, we had to just make magic online.
Yeah, that was really crazy because we connected in person once. Once. And it's been many years of Zooming. But it is really, maybe we'll talk about that a little later. We'll touch on like the digital magic that's possible. But before we go there, I would love to hear sort of your story about claiming the witch in you and sort of how you discovered witchcraft and what that looked like.
So in order to do that, I do have to bring into this cauldron, the spirit of the place that I grew up in, because I think people think about Greece as it being a very magical, romantic place with a lot of magic and lineage. And though that is true, um, I think people can't really see or maybe kind of forget that Greece, as we know it now, is it's a very new place. It's a very modern place. Not modern, but not modern, but um, is a newer nation. It's been a democracy since 1974. It had a dictatorship before then. It has a lot of civil wars and unrest and German occupation, Ottoman occupation. So when we think about Greece, I think people think a lot about ancient Greece, classical Greece, which of course has its own problems, but there's a lot of debris and rebuilding and a lot of compounded lineage and peoples and a lot of compounded trauma. So right now, the Greece that I grew up in was a very cishet patriarchal place, where the church is very strong. And though it is, in my opinion, the most pagan, witchy church there is, because it is Greek Orthodoxy, and I think it is a prime example of how syncretized practices work. Um, it was very difficult to be a different kind of person growing up there. So my family doesn't have any relationship with magic or spirit, really, which was good in the sense that we weren't one of those families that had to go to church every Sunday. I got a lot of church stuff in school because you do religion class in school. And the first intuitive hit that I had was when I was 9 years old, but that was just an intuitive hit. And I knew that my stepdad's best friend had died before anyone told me. The phone rang and I was like, he's dead. And I was like, why would I think that? And then, of course, my mother was like, Peter died. So that really shook me. And I told her that, I knew, but, she didn't really know what to do with that. So we kind of left it alone. And then I'll say things really started in my spiritual journey with menarche. And when I got my first moon, I had just turned 13 and I was hanging out with this new girl in school. I was in 8th grade and she was like all alt and living in the alt part of town, where it's known for its political leanings and more artists and creatives. And she was like, hey, do you want to come to a yoga class with me? So this is the late 90s and yoga in Greece is not really like a thing. So my gateway to spirituality was yoga, but then of course she brought me to like not a metaphysical store because we didn't have any witchy shops in Greece, but there was like this one place where this old man had these like small print books in the back. So we went there and we got a few books, and then she told me about Ouija boards, but there was no way to make a Ouija board, to get a Ouija board. So we made our own out of like, yeah. So you basically write down each letter of the alphabet on an equal like piece of paper and you cut it up and you make it in a circle and you use an upside down shot glass to communicate. So we got into a lot of trouble with that.
As you do, Ouija boards.
Yes, as you do. I didn't know anything. And I watched, again, this was the late 90s. It was the very beginning of the internet. I was one of the first people in Greece actually to have internet in my house because my mom worked for the first internet company in Greece. And there was this one website called spellsandmagic.com.
Yes. Who
That
has that domain?
I mean, I think it's still around, and if it's not still around, I'm sure we can find it on the Wayback Machine to see what it looked like because it was amazing, like early 2000s art, or just writing websites, and it went from there, and it has gone in the beginning, many dangerous routes because there was no structure and no guidance. And it was
Mhm.
just, I
And you were
mean,
open and intuitive and yeah.
and it was, I was very unharnessed and very
Mm.
unhoned. And I went through a few versions of covens because, you know, female friendship at that age, I think, is difficult. Um, and I, of course, my two guiding lights were the movies, Practical Magic and The Craft.
Mhm.
That was it. So there was a lot of, you know, blood magic and
Mhm.
weird herbs, but and I also didn't have the kind of family. Most people in Greece had a like a grandma and a village home, and they would go there for the summer, and grandma knew the plants, you know. Yes, we
Mhm.
infuse them in paraffin oil, but still, like, there is a relationship with the land. I didn't have that. My grandma was all about fashion, which I'm happy I took that from her, but but I didn't have the land relationship. And I think things really, I was just so open and out of um not misdirected, but I just didn't really have any way to do this. I got involved with the tarot and just started doing some practices like that. But things really, really shifted when I moved to San Francisco. And I moved to San Francisco in a very magical way, in a very magical, synchronicitous way. I was in my early 20s and I was in a super toxic work environment and in a super abusive relationship. And I was not dealing, but I was carrying this major unprocessed grief because I lost like my childhood friend in a car accident with four of our friends at that time. So I just didn't know how to do all that.
Mhm.
Um, and I had stopped believing in anything magic. I was like, none of this, nothing is real. It's just what I see. And one of my teachers called that a necessary step. So I guess it is. But I
Mm.
moved to the Bay Area and I didn't want to be there. And I resisted every part of the way. But because I was like, I want to be in LA, I want to be in New York. I don't want to be in San Francisco. This is a village. What is this place? Everybody here is a hippie.
Yeah.
But it was exactly what I needed because I found the community I needed. I found a place where I could be safe in practicing and exploring magic and the craft and spirituality. Everybody, you know, it is a bit overwhelming, I think, when you first get there and you haven't lived in a place that is like that, especially coming from a place where conforming is the ultimate, like what everybody wants you to do.
Mhm.
And the church is so strong to go to a place that is so secular and so open was amazing. And I found I just went deep into, I think, second house Gemini stuff of learning everything I can humanly possible. Working with intuitive, I was like, what's an intuitive guide? But that's what I do. What's a tarot reader? But that's what I do. What's a, you know, so finding the path and being able to
Yeah.
narrow it down to get to this point.
I feel like so much about the witchcraft journey is sort of like discovering practices, but also really feeling like you're at home in those practices. You're like, oh, I do this already. Or like, oh, it just feels like so natural and familiar.
Yeah. And
Um,
I think it's really, really hard to, you know, there isn't, I think we're in a better place now. Than definitely than I was, you know, 20 something years ago. But I think it's really hard when there isn't that woman at the edge of the village where you can go and apprentice with. There
mhm.
is no, there is some space, there is a little bit of let's learn, you know, you teach, I teach, but it's kind of in our, not in our silos so much, like the, you know, what you've created with the Witches Confluence is also an incredible place for that, but with integrity, right? And ethos,
Mm.
because there's so much out there of information where you, if you don't have discernment and you don't know protection, or you're not grounded, or you don't have strong boundaries energetically, psychically, physically, you're going to get in trouble.
Right.
And I just wish that there was a way to have a library, right? Of,
Hmm.
oh, what can I learn? Or a Hogwarts or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's real. I feel like, yeah, having your teachers is a deeply important part of this. And, you know, even on my journey, there have been moments where it's like, where is that person? Who's that? You know, where is the village witch at the edge?
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of like follow through to like find the communities, find the people, and discernment as well.
Discernment.
Yeah. So who are some of like the teachers or groups or lineages that you feel like have influenced you the most?
So I find this always very interesting, and this is something that I work with my clients on when we start trying to shape and hone their lineage. I think a lot of it is like for me, it's definitely Greece, like the Greek the Greekness of it all. And being able to look at, okay, what is a syncretized practice? What is so obviously pagan that the church was like, we gotta include this. Otherwise, the heathens will never come to church. So there's a lot of that in the religion itself, which I do now, I can appreciate. Um, but it started with, and I also think besides our lineage of how we came into this body, this assignment, I think there are trickles of past lives or soul lineages that we follow that don't always align with um, what we appear to be.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it started definitely with exploring. I, of course, it was the early 2000s, so I did come across Wicca, but I went behind that. I went deeper because it didn't feel very authentic to me, the way Wicca is practiced. I found out later why, but I pulled that thread, and I think the British Isles and the lore and the magic that comes out of the Celts, I had this immense attraction to Arthurian legends, and that really, really informed. And I do feel like it's part of my soul home when it comes to magic and this kind of practice. Then I discovered hoodoo, and I see the root work and how that's actually what gave me an eye into, oh, Greece has this. Like, this is crazy. We have altars everywhere and we work with ancestors, and oh my God, like, how did I never see this before? That was what it did it. And there is some sort of lineage that I haven't exactly figured out how, but there seems to be a West African tradition in my family, DNA wise. And then I see that showing up in my callings to particular Vodun practices. So that is part of it. But mostly it's uncovering, because even though I do recognize, hey, there's a soul lineage here, I always bring it back to what this assignment is about, what being born in Greece in this body is about. So even though I have other, practices that do inform and lineages that do inform the work that I do, I mostly just go back to the root. And it's often through shamanic practices and direct revelation with the land and tutelary spirits. I have found that to be the most supportive work in order for me to go deeper behind the orthodoxy and behind the classical Greece and go back to when the women were the shamans.
Mm. Yeah, I was having a conversation with another witch recently, about sort of how things are syncretized, but also just um, like the frameworks that are built around these practices, like occultism, like how the Golden Dawn used the Grail legends as the framework for a lot of their work. And if you go back, like you're talking about, ultimately, these are folk magical traditions or shamanic traditions.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important to kind of go on your own journey with that. And I really appreciate how you spoke to your own process. Because I think there's something about being a witch to me that feels very much about getting to the roots.
Yeah.
And the process of how you go about doing that as a witch is so integral to like your own magical practice.
Yeah. And it truly is a path. I find that witchcraft is a path and a craft. And it's something that, like with any craft, there is a level of apprenticeship, there is a level of trial and error, there is a level of honing your craft, and there is a level of walking the path. I mean, that's really what it is.
Mhm.
Whether it's the crooked path or not,
Mhm.
it doesn't matter. That's your path.
Yeah. So I'm curious, in terms of like where you are now with your practice. Actually, maybe I'll ask that in a moment. What I want to ask is, how did you like move from that place of feeling really open and ungrounded to a place of feeling more connected to your roots? Or was there something that really helped you? I know you found these lineages and these teachers. I don't know.
Yes, I think you're touching on um really, I feel all of our journeys, but
Yeah, I feel like everyone
um
goes through this, right? And it's like,
yeah,
what's a
yeah,
tool?
because the thing is, look, I also have a background in dance, and the only reason I bring this up is because I was told in dance the whole time I was practicing, because it is a practice. Talent gives you 10%. The rest 90% is hard work. And that applies, I think, to all art and all creativity. And I think it applies to spirituality as well, because just being a talented, gifted, open, attuned person doesn't mean anything without practice, without a container, without
Mhm.
agency, right? We don't want to be, and that was the thing, left unchecked and wild, because it was wild and it was dangerous. It was
Mhm.
dangerous in the spiritual, and it was dangerous in the physical too. I come from a history of abusive relationships. I come from a history of just every person on the street who's having a semi-psychosis wants to talk to me about it, right? So it's very, very much that. So we don't want to be that. Um, for me, it was a long journey. And I remember there was a point, it started with seeing my intuitive guide in San Francisco, where she was like, "You're so porous. You're so porous. And your hair is antennas, and you need to ground your hair." It actually started before that with a shiatsu therapist who was like, "Your hair, you need to put salt water in your hair like
Yes.
all
Cleanse
the
your
time.
hair, everyone. I mean,
Cleanse
your
it."
hair is very antenna-y, but
Yeah.
everyone out there, like your hair picks up
Yeah.
a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it's your crown, right? You need to keep it
Yeah.
clear, and everything just can get up there, especially if you have neck pain, y'all. You know what that is. But it started with that. But then I went through a period of just immersing myself in teachings and in working with teachers. So I worked with, Ariella Daly with Dreamwork. I worked with Liz Migliorelli doing an honorable apprenticeship. I worked, and at the same time, I was doing midwifery classes. I was trying to find what is my thing, what is my thing. Uh, and that was a very hard thing to focus on, but I went into this deep immersion of practices, uh, where I remember deciding I'm going to do this now. I never had a meditation practice consistently. I did a yoga teacher training, and that really helped build the muscle to sit in practice and to prioritize that for myself. But I went through a period of very just rigorous practice, rigor. There's no other way to do it. People want to be like, "Oh, I'm wishy-washy." Like, you can't, you need to be the bridge, right? You are a walking portal. you one foot in each world. In order to have one foot in each world, you need to be grounded. You need to have the architecture. You need to have everything that's Capricorn about it. So you
Mhm.
just need to be solid, because if you don't have the skeleton, the rest of it is just going to slide off. It's not going to
Yeah.
stick. So that's how it started for me. And that's sometimes people come to me and they really are thirsty for guidance and learning and connecting and all of the things, but they don't have a practice. And I start there. And it seems so basic, but so many of us are so dismembered in a way. We're in many different pieces. So many people and energies have a piece of us that we can't even gather ourselves to sit.
Yeah. That's such a great point. I mean, I think it really goes in the direction of where I'm sure a lot of us are feeling right now in this deeply chaotic world where, we go on social media platforms and we see images of genocide, and then we're being sold something shiny, and then, horrific messages about like all of the atrocities around the world. And then once again, we're being sold something shiny. And I think all of us are feeling a little bit between worlds, but not between the worlds we want to be in.
Yeah. Because, yeah, I mean, I technology is magic, and technology is magic, and the source of each of these things that we engage with tells you if it's left-handed magic or not.
Mm,
There's no non-ableist and non-racist way to talk about bad magic and good magic, so I'm using these very obscure terms, but um, you have a mirror, right? You work with a black mirror. I work with a black mirror. Everything that we interact with nowadays is a black mirror.
yeah.
And what, we are now, you and I, speaking in the void, and somehow there is one connection. But I even remember when we were doing the Confluence online for the first time ever, that we had to put fail safes in place to not allow entry to unwanted entities in this part of the network that we were taking up, right?
Mhm, mhm.
And if we didn't do that, we had unstable
Yeah.
um,
Connection.
transmissions. Yeah. So um, I think nowadays it is much more, um, I think discernment is what people need the most. And I
Yeah.
think the only way to do that, because the other thing is that, for hundreds of thousands of years, our mammal bodies were not made to intake the amount of information that we are now, right? And
Mhm.
even children being born now have a different relationship with absorbing information. And the only way to practice discernment and to be able to hear yourself loud and clear and your spirits loud and clear is to be quiet and come back to self and have a really rigorous practice of, you know, cutting all the threads and just taking that obsidian knife and just cutting everything out so you can be quiet. Like that's the thing for me. And I didn't identify it, I think, for a long time. And in later years, I have been able to identify it that when I open my computer, no, when my computer is on and it's shut down near me, I can hear it. Like I feel the psychic density of whatever is going on there.
Yeah.
I feel it when the television is off because the television never turns off unless you unplug it.
Yeah.
So and even then, like I'm the person who stays up at night because I can hear the circuit, right? So I can't hear it, right? But I can hear it. It's
Mhm.
entering this part of my psyche because I'm tuned in. So I'm like, right, if I'm destabilized and then all of this circuitry is just then how am I supposed to even hear me or my spirits or my guides?
Mm-hmm. So, what are your go-to practices for grounding back, other than
Yeah.
quiet and introspection?
Yeah. I'm not a very good quiet and introspection kind of person. I'm just not. And I think a lot of us relate. I think it's because I am very dynamic and very active, and I'm endlessly curious about things, and I have some form of neurodivergence that is undiagnosed, and I don't care. I I guide people to go with their moons in order to ground. I use their natal moons as a guide. So for me, having an Earth moon and specifically a Taurus moon, um, it's really, really important to be in the physical. So it's the right scent, the right flavors. It's a candle for me, does wonders. But this is, of course, a very simplified way because I have trained myself so rigorously that now when I turn off the lights and light a candle, my nervous system immediately recognizes that as parasympathetic.
Mm-hmm.
We're just going there. Baths, showers, things that are very much in the physical. And the luxuriating in the physical, because as much as I get frustrated that I am trapped in a body and there's like bodies need so much work, there are certain pleasures that come with having a body. One of them is eating delicious food. One of them is taking amazing showers and a scrub and the perfect kind of oil that you want to apply after. I do recognize, though, at the same time that these practices that for me and for many of us are very grounding. I can hear some other moons being like, oh, that's a nightmare. Um, you know, but I will say that it always does come back to the physical, to the senses that are physical: sight, sound, taste, scent, touch. Same as, if one is to theoretically allegedly use some altering drugs, or if someone is to be altered via spiritual practice, as happens in ceremony, the way back is through the body,
Mm-hmm.
is through the physical. Sometimes it's eating sugar. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
We got to come back.
I know a
And
medium who was like, yeah, I smoke cigarette,
uh,
you know?
and I love that because there is, I think, when it comes to magic and witchcraft and spirituality and the woo, as is the overarching term, I think there's this I think we're getting away from that, but I find that the zeitgeist has a very specific impression of what things need to look like if you
Yes.
are woo or witchy or whatever, and everything is always clean and everything is always pastels, and I'm like, no, it's not. Like, my desk is a mess. It's not always a mess, but when I'm working and when I'm in deep creative process, it's a mess. Like, it's not, it starts out
Yeah.
nicely, but then I have like 6 cups on my desk at this point because it's been a long day. And I
Yeah.
think people are like, oh, you smoke, that's so bad 80s. And I'm like, no, it's actually ancient
Yeah.
to smoke. Or not saying that you should, right? It's more about, yeah, what grounds you. And sometimes I know even drinking alcohol, because people are like, there is, yes, there is something incredibly messed up in capitalism and alcohol consumption. Yes. Um, However, it's ancestral. Like when I go to
Yeah.
Greece and they're like, here's the backyard hooch. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, man. Like that's my grandparents love me drinking that. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah,
I
there's
think,
definitely like a coded white supremacy angle too to all the like wellness,
oh yeah.
purity, new agey stuff too.
Yeah. And it's not, it's a vibe and it works, but have you gotten like, I don't know, there's something so restrained about that approach. And I think that is part of also the patriarchy,
Mhm.
women must be restrained.
Yeah,
And
and
the only,
restricted.
yes, and the only way to be a healer is that way,
Mhm.
right? The Mother Teresa way, the Virgin Mary way.
Mhm.
But there's, and I find that even in the lineages that do have to do with Mary Magdalene um and the horror aspect of magic and sanctity, it still has this element of immense femininity. I'm like, where are the Maenades? Like, where are the women who went fucking nuts in the woods and
Mhm.
dismembered a god? Where are they?
Mhm.
Where are they? Can we just get a little more crazy with this? It's fine.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, it's real. I think and it kind of goes back to this really important piece that everyone's intuition operates differently. Everyone's ancestors want to be fed a different thing.
Yeah.
Everyone's practice is deeply unique,
Personal.
um, and
It's
personal.
deeply
Yeah.
personal. And that's why I phrase, it's hard for me to phrase what I do still because it's so much more than just helping or guiding. Being psychic and being able to connect with people's spirit teams, it's not like I'm, the operator and I really want them to have the phone. Like I don't
Mhm.
want to be the operator. So that's what I'm working with people on
Mhm.
and having agency and sovereignty around their practice because it's their spirits, their ancestors, their lineage, their path, their craft. It's
Yeah,
theirs.
absolutely. So, yeah, I'm curious in terms of how you're feeling about the state of the world and the state of, you know, kind of our spiritual evolution. Like what are you most excited about? Like what are you either calling in right now or what do you see trending that excites you? It could be personal or collective.
Yeah. Well, what does excite me is this what I've noticed since 2020, because I think that was a very pivotal point in the collective, in our leveling up, and I don't really love the term leveling up. It's just because there is a lot of charlatanism out there and a lot of false, not false. There are a lot of frequencies right now on the radio that is our current existence, right? So you got to tune in to what feels resonant. And I think people who don't have this strong sense of discernment just are going to what is the loudest or the clearest or the shiniest, right? Um, but which is not necessarily positive, but what does excite me is that people are seeking. People are kind of done with the old way of doing things. And even though there is so much uncertainty around that and around what's going to happen, and, everything is a dumpster fire all of the time, in some ways, there is still this collective spark of, what are we doing? What are we doing? And I think transitions are really difficult. I'm not really certain we're going to see in our lifetime what this transition is about. Um, and for me, what has worked tremendously well in the past year, in terms of the current state of the world, is asking the question whenever I'm going to react about something, or I want to post something, or I want to argue with someone or I want to pick up a conversation, right? It informs every single piece of me is this coming from a centered place for me? Because I've noticed recently, I've worked deeply on just kind of shedding things that no longer are a part of me. And the main takeaway was your job is to be at your center. That is your job. And it sounds counterintuitive, like it sounds in many ways and in many contexts, it can sound very isolating or very not grassroots self-organizing or interdependent or anything like that. But I find it to be the most true for me right now. You know, you have to do the work. Stop getting distracted by all of it, the good and the bad. Like, yeah, take a break and smell the roses, but don't take a break and go into the doom scroll.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there is, I think this is the biggest test for us as humans right now of really exploring nuance, because I feel like the nuance is lost. And I think when you're on one-on-one or in smaller on face-to-face, even if it's a digital face conversations, there can be nuance. And I think when you're just engaging on the platforms, or with the black mirrors, right? There is no nuance.
Yeah,
And that is the big lie, right? That's
totally.
the big magic is they're right, they're wrong, we're right. It's black and white. This is what it is. And there is no space for nuance.
Yeah, that is absolutely the big lie for sure. And yeah, I think we're witnessing to a sort of reconceptualization of what it means to be tuned into our centers as well. Because I really resonate with what you said, and there's sort of this like swing towards a disavowal of the individualism, which I think has done a lot of harm in our world. But we, at the end of the day, and every minute of the day, are inextricably connected to everything, right?
Yeah.
It's like that is undeniable.
Yeah.
So we don't need to over labor that. We just need to be conscious of it, integrate it deeply into the way we operate, and move forward.
That's exactly it. And I think if one doesn't have that core, the boundaries, the structure, right, for themselves, they're looking for a place to belong and align themselves with identity stuff there.
Right.
Because there is this movement of, you know, if you are politically this, you must be talking about XYZ. If you talked about ABC, you are politically that. And it's just, and it's like, or I'm just someone who is connected and doesn't differentiate or separate the one from the other and notice how it's integrated, like you just said, exactly what you said.
And somebody that's considering multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
Like how novel.
Yeah.
To like dwell in the complexity that exists, you know? Yeah, I think I do really, I second that like excitement. I hope that we are expanding into complexity more and more.
Yeah. I mean, I do appreciate that there is this turn to real self-sufficiency and interdependence. Interdependence really, I think, is what it is. Like, you know, so many of us of our generation is leaving the cities, doesn't want to do that kind of work, doesn't think that people should have to do this kind of work, right? Doesn't that we don't feel like the world needs it, whatever that kind of word is, right? Like, you can really, really see it, I think, in the microcosm of the Bay Area, where you're like, oh yeah, the bubble burst.
Mhm.
We don't need 150,000 startups. Who knew?
Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
But we do need people to feel aligned with themselves, because
Yeah.
I think, you know, coming back to what you're talking about, to the way you guide people, is like, I think without sort of any sense of how to be spiritually aligned, we do feel adrift, and we seek out these um like the toxic twin of what we actually want, you know. um
Get chills.
yeah.
Yeah. Because
So
it's the alignment of aligning yourself with people for something greater than yourself.
mhm,
But if you have a relationship with spirit and with the gods and with the divine and whatever you want to call it, you inherently realize that you are connected to something greater than yourself. And when you're working on yourself, you're not isolating yourself. It's not from an ego position. It's from a, how can I be the most me I can be in order to get out of my own way and let the great creative spirit do its work through me. That's
mhm,
really it.
mhm.
Very potent Leo season messaging here, but
Yes, that's what to say. um I was wondering if you wanted to leave us with a suggested practice that has been helping you navigate these turbulent times.
honestly,
Give it to us.
I do struggle with this because the practice for me changes every now and then, and I do think that it does have to do with every person, but because I know I get a lot of resistance from people. That's why you hear me being, because I can be like, yes, it's lovely to sit and look at the stars. And people are like, ain't nobody got time for that.
Yeah.
But what has become a non-negotiable for me is journaling.
Mhm.
I will just come back to that over and over again. And I get a lot of resistance about that too. And then I think no matter what the practice is, whether it's journaling or whether it's breath work, that's my new thing nowadays too. Doing just breathing. It's
Mhm.
so much harder than you think, folks. It's so much harder than you think. But anything that has to do with practice or showing up for yourself, the message is disagree and commit. You can disagree, but you have to commit for a certain amount of time in order to see if it's working for you or not. Because I tell people, do you journal? No, I can't. I don't want to. I was never really a writer. I will never go back and read what I wrote. I'm like, that's not what I'm talking about. That's
Who
not what
does
the
that?
practice is. That's not what the practice is. The practice is show up to the paper and take 10 minutes with a timer to write. Oh, you don't want to meditate because you think it's XYZ, like, oh, you don't want to do breath work because it's too, disconnected. All right, just write. And if you don't write, sit there with the pen in your hand for 10 minutes. Show up every day for 2 weeks. See what happens.
Excellent advice, in my opinion.
Say the
Yeah,
writers
no,
of the group.
yeah, exactly. Mercury and Virgo over here. No, but I do think the piece of advice of like disagree and commit is really good, because I mean, I don't know. I'm a stubborn person. How many times have I been like, I don't want to do that. It won't work for me. And then I actually do it. And what happens?
And this applies to everything that we've been talking about. The getting out of your own way, the coming back to center, the ability to surrender to the thing that is bigger than yourself, and to maybe say, hey, you know what? Maybe my brain doesn't know better. Maybe if I try this, and it's very much, it's very much, it reminds me, I got this piece of advice from the book Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, where she talks about anxiety and the critic and all that stuff getting in the way. And I use this metaphor with my clients a lot. I'm like, listen, you're driving, okay? Your higher self is the one who's driving. They can be in the car and they can be talking and they can be trying to deter you and trying to give you like backseat driving and passenger seat driving and trying to give you directions, the anxiety, the fear, the critic, all of it. But you just got to be like, you know what, guys? I hear you, but I'm driving and we're doing this. That's it.
It's real. Well, I'm really excited to share this conversation with folks because I got a lot out of it. But where can folks find you? Are you on Instagram currently? I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, I am back on Instagram because I am changing my relationship with it yet again.
Good. Yeah.
But the best way to find me, I mean, I am on Instagram on Antigone.Nastos. That's my handle on everything. I'm also on TikTok, which is very fun. And it feels less echo chambery, if that makes sense. The algorithm is better over there. But I do find very aligned community on Instagram as well, which is why I'm there. My website is antigonenastos.com, and it's currently under magical makeover, but it will soon be live. So the best way really is just get on my email list, which you can find on my website. Because that's what I'm sending out. And I don't know if you saw yet, Casey, but I'm planning a retreat to Greece.
I did see this.
Next year. So I think it's time.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Antigone's newsletters are great too. Just a little plug there. Very fun and informative. And yeah, we'll put everything in our show notes and we'll get excited for that retreat.
Yeah, very excited. That'll be magic.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here. This was really special. And thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in.
Yeah. See you soon.
Be well.
Thank you for tuning in to the Modern Witches podcast. We hope you've been inspired to cultivate your own magic and to craft your own spiritual practices. Let us know what sparked your curiosity by leaving us a comment on this episode or leave us a review. And don't forget to subscribe to the show so that you never miss an episode. Your feedback and engagement truly fills our cups. If you're looking for more ways to gather with your fellow witches, please support our work on Patreon. Learn more at modernwitches.org. Blessed be.